You're the royal physician in Madrid. The year is 1834. King Ferdinand VII is dead. But for you, the work is far from over. You're called into his private chambers. Only this time, it's not for a treatment, a diagnosis, or any final words of wisdom. The Queen Regent, Maria Cristina, is waiting. Her eyes are red from crying, but her voice is steady. What she asks you to do next sends a chill through your spine. It's not just unusual, it's unnatural. You hesitate. You glance toward the bed where Ferdinand's lifeless body rests. And even in death, the man seems to taunt you. Like some cruel echo of the 2 decades he held Spain in a grip of paranoia and iron-fisted control. But it's not his face that captures your attention. It's what lies beneath the sheets. That one thing, the grotesque physical feature that, in many ways, defined his reign. Not his cruelty, not his political betrayals, but this, a grotesquely misshapen, oversized member. A deformity so bizarre that historians whispered about it for generations, but never dared record it in official texts. As you prepare to carry out your duty, preserving this anatomical aberration for reasons only the Queen and God could know, your mind floods with stories you once thought were palace gossip. Now they seem all too real. The custom-made cushions, the wives' screams echoing down marbled corridors, the whispered attempts to produce an heir through means that bordered on torture. And now here you are, preserving not just a piece of human flesh, but the most horrifying symbol of a reign built on deformity, on both the body and the soul. Before we descend into these buried stories, these tales of dysfunction, trauma, and royal delusion, consider subscribing and tapping that like button. If you enjoy history's darker corners, if you're drawn to the secrets most would rather forget, then you're in the right place. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It still amazes me how our shared curiosity connects us across centuries, continents, and screens. To understand Ferdinand VII, you need to start with the blood. Not a metaphor, the literal blood that pumped through his veins. It was cursed, not by sorcery or divine wrath, but by centuries of royal inbreeding. The Spanish Habsburgs and Bourbons had spent generations marrying cousins, uncles, nieces. What they produced wasn't a lineage. It was a genetic minefield. Mental illness, physical deformities, fragile minds in broken bodies. And then came Ferdinand, born at El Escorial on October 14, 1784, to Charles IV and Maria Luisa of Parma, who, yes, were first cousins. Ferdinand never had a chance. The genetic dice had been loaded for centuries, and Ferdinand rolled snake eyes. As a child, his condition began to emerge. At first, it was chalked up to awkward growth, but by adolescence, the royal physicians could no longer pretend it was normal. Whispers spread. The prince's anatomy wasn't just large, it was grotesque. One physician wrote, "His Royal Highness is afflicted with a member of such extraordinary dimensions and peculiar form that intimate relations may prove difficult." Another didn't bother with formality. "It's like a billiard cue, thin at the root, thick as a fist at the end, and long enough to use as a cane." This wasn't envy, it was horror, because in Ferdinand's world, size wasn't a symbol of virility, it was shame. Classical ideals celebrated moderation, proportion. The Greek sculptures didn't flaunt, they refined. Ferdinand's condition, by contrast, marked him as a freak, and he knew it. His father was an absentee monarch, more interested in hunting than politics. His mother paraded her affair with the powerful Manuel de Godoy through the palace, as if it were a formal alliance. Ferdinand grew up in this toxic court. absorbing every betrayal, every humiliation, and then, on top of it all, his own body betrayed him. The servants laughed behind his back. Foreign envoys whispered reports home. The royal court became a stage of subtle mockery, and Ferdinand was the central punchline. And so the boy became cruel, vindictive, obsessed with control. By his teenage years, Ferdinand was already punishing anyone who saw his naked body. One court chaplain recorded that a young page once stumbled into his changing room by mistake. The boy was flogged, his family exiled. The lesson was clear. Ferdinand's shame was sacred and dangerous. As he neared marriageable age, royal physicians were forced to confront the problem head-on. Dr. Francisco Flores, one of his personal doctors, recorded detailed notes in secret. Here's an excerpt. The royal member presents a most unusual configuration. The base is narrow, no more than the width of a man's thumb, but it swells grotesquely, reaching a girth that defies anatomical precedent. Its length exceeds 10 inches in a non-aroused state, increasing substantially with stimulation. A curvature exists, along with growths of unknown tissue function. Intimacy, as most would understand it, is impossible without severe injury or modification. Let that sink in. This wasn't just about size, it was about structure, and with royal duties demanding an heir, doctors and craftsmen had to get creative. They constructed marital implements, euphemistically called aids, from silk, leather, and soft metals, custom cushions, padded supports, oils, salves. The royal bedchamber became a bizarre fusion of medical clinic and sexual dungeon. But even these tools couldn't solve the deeper issue: Ferdinand's trauma. His obsession with fixing what nature had broken. He consumed every substance that promised a cure. Ground rhinoceros horn, pearl dust, rare jungle herbs, potions to shrink it, elixirs to straighten it, tinctures to boost fertility. All worthless. In 1702, Ferdinand married his cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples and Sicily. She was young, bright, and full of naive optimism. She'd heard stories of El Deseado, the desired one, the title some monarchists had given him. She imagined a romantic future, a handsome prince. Reality hit hard. The wedding was opulent, the honeymoon catastrophic. Her ladies-in-waiting were puzzled when Ferdinand's valet requested an unusual assortment of supplies. Cushions, ointments, tools. They assumed it was some arcane Spanish tradition. Then came the wedding night. Maria Antonia screamed. Not metaphorically, she literally screamed in terror. One attendant recalled that she shouted, "Monster! Monster!" while backing into a corner, pale and shaking. What she saw, her husband's grotesquely large, disfigured member, was nothing like the gentle lectures the nuns had given her. What followed wasn't a night of romance. It was a clinical operation. Ferdinand's doctors were summoned. The cushions were arranged. The oils applied. The procedure began. It was painful, dehumanizing, and so traumatic that Maria Antonia had to be drugged with laudanum just to endure it. From that first night, Maria Antonia's life became a cycle of fear and sedation. Each attempt at intimacy was pre-planned, almost ritualistic. The cushions were positioned just right, the ointments carefully applied. She was given just enough laudanum to dull the pain, but not so much that she'd lose consciousness. Then came the act itself. Never passionate, never tender. Just a grim obligation, endured in silence or muffled sobs. Afterward, the two would retreat to opposite wings of the palace to recover, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Months passed, then years with no pregnancy. and Ferdinand's frustration turned into obsession. He became convinced that his wife's emotional revulsion was preventing conception, that she was somehow rejecting his seed through sheer will. Desperation overtook reason. He began consulting charlatans and mystics, anyone who claimed to have a solution. Court records show that he ordered the construction of restraints, leather straps with silken padding, to keep Maria Antonia in place during intercourse. Not to hurt her, he insisted, just to optimize positioning. It only got worse. Ferdinand turned to astrology. He began timing their encounters with moon phases, sunspots, and celestial alignments. He summoned astrologers from Italy, fortune tellers from France, even a supposed wise man from the Orient. This mystic told him his deformity was not a curse, but a symbol of power. A divine dragon's gift, and that with the proper rituals, its potential could be unlocked. For 3 months, Ferdinand and Maria Antonia participated in bizarre ceremonies involving incense, chanting, and acrobatic positions, supposedly drawn from ancient Chinese scrolls. The queen, too traumatized to resist, did as she was told, and then, incredibly, she became pregnant. Twice. The court rejoiced. Ferdinand beamed with pride. Spain dared to hope. But both pregnancies ended in heartbreak. The first miscarriage came in 1804, 4 months in. Doctors quietly blamed maternal frailty, but in private they admitted the truth. Maria Antonia's body was simply too damaged, emotionally and physically, to carry a child. The second time was even more devastating. She made it to the final month before losing the baby in a bloody, nightmarish labor that nearly killed her. She never recovered. Laudanum became a daily necessity. Her eyes grew hollow. She moved like a ghost. By 1807, she was dead, officially from fever, unofficially from despair. Ferdinand's reaction? Cold, paranoid. He didn't mourn her. He accused her, claimed she'd been sabotaging their efforts, that she'd taken herbs to prevent pregnancy, that she was part of some liberal conspiracy to deny him an heir. Her ladies-in-waiting were questioned. The royal apothecary who had treated her turned up dead just days later. Some whispered he left behind a letter explaining everything, but it vanished, seized by Ferdinand's agents. And just like that, Ferdinand was in the market for a second wife. This time, he chose Maria Isabel of Portugal, another cousin, another innocent. She arrived in Madrid in 1816, 19 years old, hopeful and radiant. She had been warned, gently, about special marital needs. Her ladies-in-waiting had been briefed on the oils and cushions, but nothing prepared her for what was to come. The wedding was a glittering spectacle, all gold leaf and powdered wigs. But the wedding night? A disaster. The screams were loud enough that guards outside the royal suite heard them. The next morning, bloodied linens were rushed out in silence. Furniture was broken. Maria Isabel had been introduced to the same terrible reality that had destroyed her predecessor. She didn't scream after that. Instead, she grew quiet, jumpy, pale. Her voice developed a tremble. Palace staff called them episodes. Today, we'd call them trauma responses. She'd flinch when her husband entered a room. She avoided eye contact. She became emaciated, stopped smiling. And Ferdinand? He took her fear personally, thought she was mocking him, thought she was plotting something. So he did what he always did. He tightened control. He ordered her letters intercepted, had her food tasted, her rooms searched. He saw betrayal in every gesture. Her servants were swapped out regularly, interrogated about her daily routines. Nothing was left to chance. The obsession to produce an heir consumed him. He began hosting private medical conferences in the royal chambers, invited anatomists from Germany, surgeons from France, even circus performers who claimed experience with unusual anatomies. They came, they examined, they theorized. The palace bedchamber became a medical amphitheater. And Maria Isabel? She was reduced to a patient in her own marriage. A court physician's diary describes one such session. Ferdinand, naked, positioned on a velvet platform, surrounded by men in powdered wigs taking measurements, drawing sketches, offering suggestions for new devices and procedures. All while Maria Isabel, drugged and pale, waited behind a screen. Some of these illustrations, done in pen and ink, ended up circulating in underground medical journals. European scholars debated whether Ferdinand's condition was due to gigantomastia of the genitalia, a form of localized hormonal excess, or some unknown congenital deformity. One French doctor simply called it the monstrous manhood of Spain. Back in Madrid, Maria Isabel deteriorated. She stopped eating altogether, slept little. She spoke of a shadow in the room that watched her constantly. Palace whispers suggested that the queen had become haunted, whether by ghosts or memories, no one knew. In 1818, she died, officially from nervous exhaustion. Unofficially, she gave up. Some claimed it was self-inflicted. Others believed her body simply couldn't take it anymore. Either way, she joined Maria Antonia in the silent sorority of royal women consumed by Ferdinand's obsessions. The king's response? Familiar. He suspected foul play, ordered multiple autopsies, had her attendants arrested, claimed foreign powers had poisoned her to undermine the Bourbon line. His grief wasn't grief. It was delusion. He even commissioned a death mask of Maria Isabel's face and kept it in his private chambers, whispering to it during fits of insomnia. Yet within weeks, he was planning another wedding. But by now, word had spread. Ferdinand's reputation was international. He wasn't just el deseado anymore. He was el deformado, the deformed one. Marriage negotiations with European royals grew complicated. Princesses declined. Families made outrageous demands. Separate bedrooms, ironclad prenuptial agreements, personal guards. Eventually, one house bit, the royal family of Saxony. They were broke. And they had a daughter, Maria Josefa Amalia, who was old enough, desperate enough, and Catholic enough to be acceptable. The third marriage was more subdued. Fewer guests, fewer fireworks, just quiet desperation and hushed hopes. Maria Josefa was 24. She had been warned in clinical detail what to expect. She brought her own physician, her own medical devices, her own drugs. She approached the marriage not as a romance, but as a medical experiment. With calm detachment, she recorded each attempt at intimacy in a journal. Dates, times, methods, techniques, failures. The coldness of it unnerved Ferdinand, her scientific tone, her lack of horror. It made him feel like a specimen, and his paranoia grew. He began suspecting she was documenting everything to send back to Saxony, that she was a spy, that her doctor was gathering information for rival thrones. He had their correspondence intercepted, their rooms searched, her notes confiscated, and still no heir. Spain, meanwhile, was falling apart. Its colonies were revolting, its people starving. But Ferdinand's focus remained on his anatomy, his bedroom, and his phantom hopes of succession. And then, in 1829, the unthinkable happened. Maria Josefa became pregnant. It was a miracle, or so it seemed. After decades of trauma, failed marriages and royal desperation, Spain held its breath. Could it really be? Could the monstrous king with the cursed body finally produce a living heir? Ferdinand was ecstatic, or rather manic. He hired elite guards to watch over Maria Josefa around the clock. Her food was blessed and double-tested. Her chambers were swept for toxins. He brought in doctors from across Europe. Priests blessed the unborn child in utero. He even consulted mystics, just in case divine intervention had played a role. There would be no mistakes this time. But the pregnancy didn't go as planned. At 7 months, complications began. Modern medicine would likely identify it as placental abruption. But back then, in a palace ruled by superstition and paranoia, no one knew what to do. And Ferdinand, always suspicious of trained physicians, refused to follow conventional treatments. He insisted on consulting alchemists, astrologers, and self-proclaimed miracle workers. The Queen's condition deteriorated. On May 18, 1829, Maria Josefa went into premature labor. It was catastrophic. Ferdinand, for reasons no one dared question, insisted on being present. He stood near the bed, barking orders, accusing doctors of sabotage, even as the Queen screamed in agony. The baby, a daughter, was born alive but only survived a few hours. Maria Josefa clung to life for 3 more weeks before succumbing to infection and blood loss. The doctors called it childbed fever. The court called it heartbreak. Ferdinand called it murder. He refused to bury the bodies. For days, he demanded that doctors keep trying to revive them. They used heat, stimulants, prayers. Nothing worked. The bodies began to decay. The palace stank. Only when rigor mortis made their condition undeniable did the king permit a funeral. But even in death, he didn't let go. He had death masks made of both mother and daughter and placed them beside the previous masks of Maria Antonia and Maria Isabel. His private chambers had become a gallery of grief, a museum of failure, and yet he still wasn't done. Later that same year, his ministers quietly arranged a 4th marriage. Spain was crumbling. It needed stability. Ferdinand needed an heir. The candidate? Maria Cristina of Naples, a distant cousin, and more importantly, already pregnant, with someone else's child. Everyone knew the truth. Maria Cristina was visibly with child when she arrived. The court whispered. The foreign ambassadors reported. But Ferdinand? He didn't care. He needed an heir. And if God wasn't going to give him one, he'd take someone else's and call it divine will. In 1830, Maria Cristina gave birth to a girl, Isabella. And just like that, Spain had a new future. A princess. A symbol of hope. But to Ferdinand, Isabella represented something else entirely. A contradiction he could never reconcile. She was his greatest success and the living proof of his greatest failure. The final years of Ferdinand's life were an unraveling of everything. His sanity, his body, his court. He became obsessed with Maria Cristina's every move. He knew the child wasn't his, but he had to maintain the illusion. And that illusion needed control. Total control. He installed peepholes in the palace walls so he could spy on the Queen, not just during the day, but constantly. Servants reported seeing the king with one eye pressed against a hidden slit, while Maria Cristina nursed Isabella, said her prayers, or simply sat alone. He scrutinized every gesture for signs of betrayal. Meals were no longer just meals. They were elaborate rituals. Every dish tasted by multiple servants. Each required to wait 30 minutes before the food was served, just in case of slow-acting poison. Some tasters collapsed from exhaustion. Ferdinand saw this as confirmation of the threat, not evidence of overwork. Maria Cristina, trapped in this paranoid surveillance state, began to crumble. She wrote desperate letters to her family in Naples, letters intercepted by Ferdinand's agents. In them, she described her life as a prison. "I live in a glass cage," she wrote, "watched in every breath, every glance, every silence." And still, the king wasn't satisfied. He assigned spies to watch her prayers, measured how long she spent in chapel, monitored the books she read, ordered loyalty tests for every courtier who dared to compliment her. Did "you look lovely today" mean she was conspiring with foreign powers? To Ferdinand, it just might. Foreign diplomats were horrified. They sent urgent warnings back home. The Spanish king was unstable, paranoid, possibly delusional. Marriage negotiations with other royal houses stalled. No one wanted to be part of Spain's madness. And the economy? In freefall. Spain was hemorrhaging wealth. The American colonies had revolted, one after another. And instead of dealing with it, Ferdinand spent the treasury on guards, secret corridors, hidden doors, and medical oddities. Spain's problems weren't being governed. They were being ignored. But Ferdinand's darkest spiral was still to come. As Isabella grew, he became fixated on her paternity. He'd stare at her for hours, comparing her features to portraits of himself, Maria Cristina, and every male relative of hers from Naples. He even hired artists to render composite sketches of possible fathers, then held them side by side with baby Isabella's face. He hired genealogists, physicists, anatomists, anyone who might prove the girl was his. The reports were always the same, vague, inconclusive, full of euphemisms. No one dared tell the king the obvious. He clung to his fantasy, but it haunted him. Late at night, he'd hold Isabella and cry, or rage, or whisper to her in broken prayers, asking for forgiveness. He saw her both as a savior and a curse, a reminder that he was both king and fraud. As his health declined, so did the palace. Servants rotated daily. Ministers were interrogated for loyalty infractions. Courtiers stopped speaking openly, even in private. Everyone suspected everyone else. Ferdinand's madness infected the very air of the royal court. In 1832, it reached a new low. He became convinced that Maria Cristina was trying to poison him. Through touch, he ordered pre-intimacy medical inspections. Doctors were forced to examine her, while Ferdinand watched before any physical contact. It wasn't intimacy, it was degradation. And still, he pressed on. He ordered Isabella's clothing inspected for tracking devices, her dolls dismembered for hidden messages, her baths monitored. He held her close, desperate for a connection, terrified of the truth. By 1833, it was over. Ferdinand stopped eating. He barely spoke. His speeches became garbled strings of accusations and historical delusions. His body shook. His skin grew gray. His mind, once dangerous, was now lost. On September 29, 1833, Ferdinand VII died. The official cause? Gout. The real cause? A lifetime of unrelenting paranoia, sexual trauma, psychological torment, and physiological suffering that not even royal privilege could shield him from. In secret, his physicians performed one final task. They preserved his most infamous feature, the monstrous member, the deformity that had shaped a king and scarred a nation. It measured over 14 inches, with a girth that varied wildly from tip to base, and signs of internal scarring, botched self-surgeries, failed interventions. It was sealed, hidden, locked away in the Vatican archives. Too dangerous, too grotesque, too real. Ferdinand VII is remembered as one of the most destructive monarchs in European history, but not for wars, not for reforms, for something far more tragic. He was a king who couldn't rule his own body, and let that failure define his kingdom. Spain paid the price. His wives paid the price. His subjects, his daughter, his legacy, they all bore the weight of one man's disfigurement and the delusions it bred. And in a dark, locked chamber somewhere in Vatican City, preserved in wax and silence, lies the most grotesque symbol of all, the king's final